I speak into this thing?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I think I'm gonna stay here for a bit. Oh my gosh! Wow, hello. This is such a great turnout. I'm so excited. I see so many graduate students too, and it's amazing to have students here and also faculty and colleagues. So I'm so excited to be here. So today I'm going to be giving a talk on my book that I'm currently writing. So this is really good pressure to force me to finish this manuscript. I was just telling Mary that I think I'm done with this book. I don't want to feel like I present on it so many times already. But yeah, so this is a book that I'm writing on that was from my dissertation research. When I was doing work on Hmong and type 2 diabetes, I thought that that work would have been specifically US based, and then turns out they were returning to Southeast Asia for health and healing, right? And so why would a population that fled a country as refugee find that there is health and healing from chronic diabetes, right? And so that kind of investigation had led me to really think about actually questions of empire, questions about post-refugee life, and what that is like for the refugee who develops chronic disease in the US, right? And what might these returns in itself signal, right? And so as some of that work, I draw on psychoanalysis to think about the question of life and living for a refugee and livability. So let me get started. Oh, I have to just hear it, right? Is it up or down? Sideways. Okay. So I had the flu last week, and I'm 7 days post symptoms, so no longer contagious. But I still have this like lingering cough. So if I start coughing, I'm sorry. So I always do this little spiel. So I'm a medical anthropologist trained in the humanities, social science, and academic medicine. So ultimately I see my work as an anthropologist, which is one that is a storyteller. So I am a child born a refugee, and this positionality has allowed me to see the duality of growing up in the U.S. alongside the experiences of my parents and my community as they age in this place called refuge, right? And I understand storytelling as illuminating what it means to be human. However, the stories of my interlocutors are not just to illuminate the human, but as Dorothy Allison writes, it is also the work of bending theory to make something useful. But not only so, the storyteller needs to state their intentions. For me, I move through this work with and in love. This work is a labor of love, a love for my people and for humanity, but a love for life and the potential that love might be able to produce. And so I want to begin just kind of a little quick here. So whenever I present my work, this book, The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down, always comes up. I know Logan, my TA, is here in the room, and that also came up yesterday during lecture as well. So this is a book that continues to be taught today. If you've read it, it's about a Hmong child who develops epilepsy, and the kinds of cultural narratives that Anne Fetterman, the journalist, writes about that Hmong people have that shape their health and illness. So this book, along with longer histories of Western missionaries and colonialism, from the French to Americans, have shaped the foundation of Hmong studies, where Hmong ontologies and epistemologies were treated as primitive and backwards, and where the knowledge of Hmong people's practices were an imperial apparatus for conquest. Those traces remain in the field, from how knowledge is created about Hmong people and how people are represented and conceived of. They have real-world impacts on how Hmong people themselves see themselves today in the world. And so I want to begin my speech with this archival moment that continues to haunt me, right? It has stood out to me. That has also allowed me to listen to and form Hmong ways of knowing and being that challenges and undoes Western epistemologies and ontologies. Okay, I might get this right soon. So when I was the director of Hmong studies at the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh, I'm just gonna close my laptop here quickly. I ended up inheriting these National Geographics from a faculty at UW-Oshkosh. And so these National Geographics documented America's Secret War in Laos, right, Hmong refugee camp experiences, as well as their early resettlement time in the U.S. Maybe some of you can imagine what it's like to be handed these kinds of material as a Hmong refugee child, born stateless, right, and reading about how Hmong people were thought about, written about and presented with images of dead bodies that look like mine and similar to my children, right? The grief and the sadness that sometimes when you're looking through some of these images, it's really hard to keep looking, right? And so but sometimes that's the discomfort of being the researcher, of the importance of bending theory, right? And so one article in particular has captivated my attention. It's written by journalist W.E. Garrett on writing on Hmong people in his article, The Hmong of Laos, No Place to Run. So this article documented America's secret war in Laos, and he interviews Dr. Yang Dao and requests him, and Dr. Yang Dao had told him, this is when you hear people say Hmong people means free people, this is kind of the moment where Dr. Yang Dao tells Garrett to write Hmong people as free men, right? And throughout this article, Garrett writes that Hmong people are independent people hounded by a devastating war that they never understood, a war that oh my gosh, I cannot speak today, decimated them, and a war that once again made their flight their way of life. So Hmong people were written on as a people that were in a deep cultural freeze because of their residence on mountains, but through engagements with American aid workers, they were educated on basic sciences. In other words, Garrett writes, quote, to bring Hmong people to the Stone Age, to the space age, right? So Hmong people were living in the Stone Age, and it was through American intervention we were bringing them to the space age. So Garrett also wrote about Edgar Papero, who is an Indiana farmer who came to Laos 14 years before Garrett's interview here to start at the start of the war to teach modern methods of agriculture to an already agricultural population. So Pop, as Garrett writes, was revered as the Mr. sent from above, right? So a lot of very godlike narratives in white saviorism, and that Beals spent most of his time nursing Hmong people. His role, as well as other humanitarian aid workers, taught Hmong people agriculture as a way to displace their cash crop, which was opium, with other cash crops as ginseng, cardamom, coffee, and mushrooms. While most of the article in Garrett's voice, his representation and Pop's characterization of Hmong people, there is this moment that is haunting, right? That brings ghostly voices to the fore. So on page 109, Hmong people in the village of Pu Pa Daning, where Gary Alex, an agricultural advisor to the U.S. Agency for International Development, and his assistant were accused of the sudden death of 3 babies. When the shaman diagnosed the cause to be Gary's assistants placing 200 potted plants in the nursery under the shade of this huge rock that you see here, the shaman said that the babies had died because the crops had offended the spirits of the rock. So how might we also make spaces to interpret the spirit's intervention, the death of these 3 children? Oops. Oh, I got it. The death of these 3 children in accusing America. While this spiritual accusation sounds irrational and absurd, right? I listen to these accusations as pointing to the conditions that expose Hmong people to death. The presence of U.S. humanitarian workers and agricultural specialists were forced to modernize, put Hmong people in the position to be forced to modernize while fleeing a war zone. And the spirits, I like to think, were right. Caring for Hmong life in the U.S. and Southeast Asia was not to ensure Southeast Asian life, but rather the life of American ideals and democracy. So there's this quote that I don't have on the slide. Oh, they went the other way. but American USAID in Laos offered to help Hmong, but not only to save Hmong people, but further expose Hmong people to more deaths. As the war in Laos displaced more and more Hmong people to lowland areas, 80% of Hmong people fell ill to malaria, dengue fever, and the average lifespan of Hmong people was only 35 years, with a really high mortality rate of 50%. So perhaps the spirits are onto something, right? Many years now, right, Hmong scholars of Hmong descent are the ghosts who also must speak for ghosts. Those who are deemed less knowledgeable, those who are deemed primitive, right, those who are marginalized, those who are seen as that knowledge and who they are as human and non-human others, right? So I open up this example to illustrate the ways empire, through its various agents, actors, and scholars, have made ghosts in the field of Hmong studies, right? And have made Hmong people ghosts themselves. By listening to ghosts, to these traces where I see inkling of Hmong ways of knowing and being, whether these are the ghosts of the dead, the departed, or even ourselves, right? Hmong people, it is through these narratives I hear the registers of imperial harm, conditions of violence, but also the depth of Hmong solution and healing and a philosophy on life and living. So it is not enough to do research to service imperial knowledge base. We have to craft stories that are theoretically sophisticated, rigorous, but most importantly, useful. As anthropologist Lisa Stevenson says, quote, "We need to listen differently to the lives and the worlds of our interlocutors and the worlds that they so long to belong to," end quote. And so we do research on and with an eye towards love and bearing witness. So I try to do this work in my book that I'm currently writing, The Chronic Refugee, Hmong American Afterlives and Empire. And this book is a project that brings together the story of diabetes, one whereby Americans are told that if they just eat right, exercise, and take care of their health, they will be healthy. And the story of the refugee, where we are told that refugees are saved upon resettlement in the US. This project's framework of the chronic refugee is a social figure that represents the intersection of chronic disease, diabetes, and the condition of being a refugee, even when the political designation no longer applies, for which my interlocutors articulate at this intersection. And so through this intersection, and my use of Hmong epistemologies and ontologies, I argue that Hmong people articulate the harms of empire, whereby life in the US is not salvation, but rather slow death. They articulate Hmong sovereignty for the refugee, which is found in the dead, because in the spaces of biomedicine where life is the rule, death is taboo. My interlocutors summon up death as a cure for their slow death in the empire, but also their ongoing chronic refugee displacement in the US, and that they are claiming and reclaiming sovereignty for refugees. But lastly, it is feminist Hmong ontologies of life that provide a solution for slow death in the empire. It imagines that the refugee comes back to life and that it is through each other and living a life that is witnessed together is the way in which refugees return back to life. So today's presentation is informed by ethnographic research that spans 2.5 years. I also want to say a little bit about my methodology. So I'm a 1.5 generation Hmong daughter. I'm also a mother. So growing up intersectionally, I learned Hmong until I was in grade school. And so all of that is my first language, and it has indeed been limited. But nonetheless, that positionality has afforded me the ability to not only take strange the culture of medicine, but also the culture of Hmong people. For example, what you'll see sometimes in this presentation is that I'll take Hmong words and I make it literal. I translate it literally, which is not something you typically advise when it comes to translation. But I do that in order to dissect their words for its potentiality, right? And in making it strange, it is the literal translation, right? It's not easy to the ear, but it allows me to see the power and the value of Hmong epistemologies and ontologies. So my book project is on type 2 diabetes. And just to get a show of hand, how many folks know people with diabetes? Yeah, right. So it's an issue that impacts a lot of folks. So when I did do the slide, diabetes was the 7th leading killer. It's now moved down to the 8th. But if you have COVID, right, during COVID, we were reminded of the pressing concerns of type 2 diabetes, right, whereby if you had diabetes, you were at a greater risk for COVID mortality, right, especially with COVID, if they had comorbidities alongside diabetes. So you can see the prevalence rates for type 2 diabetes and just how costly it is. And although Asian Americans are seen to have less type 2 diabetes compared to non-Hispanic Blacks and Hispanics, the issue of data disaggregation is something that still is an issue. So there's only been one study that actually tried to document diabetes prevalence in the Hmong community, which is at 19.1% prevalence rate, right? Which is fairly high, and there has not been a study ever since. So type 2 diabetes is a disease in which the body's beta cells or insulin are no longer capable of taking the sugar into the blood, which your food is broken down into sugar. And so the body cell is not able to take in energy. And so this is either because the body cell can no longer receive beta cells or insulin, or that the pancreas does not release sufficient amount of insulin into the bloodstream. But most importantly for me, type 2 diabetes has garnered research from various disciplines because of its biosocial complexity. In a review of literature, anthropologist Steve Frazaka, who also did a PhD here at Madison, now is retired in Canada. He's really happy. Argues that researchers have often turned to the acculturation theory to explain diabetes prevalence with the currency of the 3 gene hypothesis that suggests that communities exposed to long durations of starvation are more likely to have diabetes because of epigenetics. All in all, these theories have posited that communities of color have a genetic susceptibility due to their inability to deal with westernization, and you can see that kind of undertone with Hmong folks now. And so what I like to teach my students is that Hmong people and the study of Hmong people has influenced American education. So the book, The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down, details these cultural beliefs, such as not touching a Hmong person on their head, or that there's the ideas that their spirits have left their body, and that epilepsy means you're going to become a shaman, right? And so this is taught all over American universities and schools. And so health science research on Hmong has been most concerned about documenting Hmong cultural models and Hmong health beliefs in order to intervene and foster life. So in all, these efforts focus on extrapolating cultural perceptions of Hmong for intervention to ensure better diabetes outcomes. However, the construction of culture to communities of color with bowel medicine is no accident. Anthropologists have argued that culture has served as a tool for naturalizing culture to racially marked bodies, and at the same time erasing systemic and racial inequality. Specifically, the hypervisibility of Hmong culture and the erasure of the fact that this is a refugee community, right, who is resettled into places of high poverty, racial segregation, and a community that continues to face social and economic inequality, right, is a practice that Hmong people are continually racialized in by making them cultural. The ongoing erasure of Hmong life as it plays out in the same racialized landscape of the US is also an erasure that has deep-seated histories in US imperialism in Southeast Asia. So going back to the central premise of this talk, Hmong ways of knowing and being illuminate the violence of empire, but it also offers solutions for Hmong life and living. Oh, I missed the slide already. So my first point is that Hmong ways of knowing and being articulate the harms of empire as it is registered in the body, registered as the increasing blood sugar levels for the chronic life in empire. So as a classic anthropologist, I'm going to read a vignette. Maria's like, yeah, sorry, I'm sorry. Okay. We all experience stress, Dr. Vincent Moore, a Hmong doctor, said to his 3 Hmong patients with type 2 diabetes, even myself. Leading a diabetes education group, Dr. Moore spoke about the impact of mental health on blood sugar levels. When experiencing a stressful situation, the body is flooded with adrenaline and cortisol hormones, a stress hormone, that helps to signal to the brain that a reaction to a situation, you either fight or flee or freeze, right, or face what you're dealing with. These hormones result in the body's secretion of glucose, or in lay terms, sugar, into the blood to enable the body to pursue whatever physical reaction that the individual chooses. The excretion of glucose into the bloodstream ensures that the body has access to immediate energy to fight or flee. However, for those with type 2 diabetes, the rising glucose levels in the body cannot easily be removed. As well, Dr. Moore continues, our lifestyles have changed. We are no longer facing a threat that requires one to fight or flee. So in our current day life, the threat we now experience is chronic stress. And we usually cannot enable our biological responses to fight or flee. Instead, the stress hormone builds up in the body, and the body secretes more blood glucose, and there is no release. So rather than feeling stressed or worried, Dr. Moore suggested to these 3 Hmong patients, we can control our bodily reaction by isolating ourselves until we feel well enough to re-engage in the situation. He showed a photo of a serene lake and a pier in canoe, and this is in Minnesota, so of course it has to have a photo of a lake, okay? That was surrounded by green pines and is a place that he associates with calming effects. So when Dr. Moa finished his presentation, one patient, Yoa, who had good control of her diabetes and sugar, instructed Vincent to cover a new topic. She also corrected some of my translation too. She's a really good, she was a medical interpreter in Laos actually during the war. So Yoa had received medical training in Vientiane, Laos, and took additional classes when she arrived in Minnesota, right? And so she was also still continuing to do her medical interpreter in the US. So yes, Yoa affirmed Vincent's presentation. But then said, we have already walked ahead, now we must come back and walk in the middle, the route. Right? She continues, I want to talk about genyoshia, right? Stress or worries. You are a doctor, can you say more about why I have nyoshia? Is life good? I need you to come and tell me why I have diabetes. There are other people who have marital problems, harassments, problems with children. Why do we have diabetes? In tracing the root of type 2 diabetes, my interlocutors throughout the diabetes group visits and the interviews that I've collected point to the ways the everyday life in the US is a slow death. As one of my interlocutors said, the reason why we need this group visit is that everything is a thing that will kill you. From economic precarity, I had interlocutors who cited the fact that they were unemployed. That was when they became diagnosed with diabetes. So in 2008, with the economic crash, many jobs were, people lost a lot of jobs, right? And so they had to learn to repurpose their labor, which is really hard because when refugees come to the US, they are trained for a certain labor market. And when that labor market crashes, such as manufacturing that gets shipped abroad, how does a refugee population repurpose their labor without proper supports, right? And they also talked about the unraveling family relationships that they experience as refugees who age in the US. So their children were leaving for jobs, right? And so they were on their own, having to navigate life on their own, as well as divorced women who ended up experiencing more precarious social conditions when you were no longer married. And a lot of them talked about mourning irrecoverable losses, right, that coincide with the syndemics of diabetes and being a refugee. So for me, the chronic refugee helps to articulate that life after empire is not salvation or refuge, right, but rather slow death. And in that slow death, my interlocutors often summon up their future death, a taboo in biomedicine. It's something we did not talk about at all in diabetes group visits. We don't talk about death, other than if you needed to sign it and a life directive, but that was it. So because diabetes management is about the present and about managing your blood glucose level as to foster one's life, right? Life in the present moment is so central. So the moments in which my interlocutors are centering death in these moments, I find to be really powerful, right? So this is my second claim that Hmong articulations of becoming the dead are not fatalistic, as Western epistemologies would have us believe it to be, but rather this connection to the soon-to-be dead for Hmong people with diabetes is actually a connection, right, to the eternal, a connection to sovereignty, right, that is not displaced, right, sovereignty that is not past, right, but that is actually located in the dead, right, it's not located in nation, state, or land. So in critiquing life in the empire as not salvation, but in slow death, these chronic refugees articulate a sovereignty that is not lost, as per the political designation of the refugee would allude us to believe, but actually that the refugee sovereignty is within the dead and within the present. So during my early stages of fieldwork, I volunteered at an adult day program that brought elderly Southeast Asian Americans together for social gathering. Every day they were bused to the center where they were served rice porridge or congee, and at times eggs and bananas. For most of the 6 hours they spent at the center, they would converse with each other, with their usual table mates. They would play bingo. They would go on field trips to the park or to the market. So I met Zia and his wife during my time at the center. I became so familiar with the details of their life and entangled in their gossip that I no longer called them Neta Yotzi, which is grandma, grandpa, but by their first name. And they would introduce me to people on the phone as their friend. Zia was a previous special guerrilla unit soldier for the Hmong General Wing Pao in the Secret War. I often observed Zia with his fragile frame and slightly hunched over posture, pacing the gymnasium room at the adulting program with 2-pound dumbbells in each hand. He would be curling them as he walked back and forth. Right? Zia suffered from diabetes along with his wife, who told me that her husband was constantly concerned about his health and exercised whenever he could. He told me that on the day he was diagnosed, he had gone to the bathroom, and after he went to wash his face, his vision went dark on him. He called his wife, who then called the social worker, since they were elderly and did not speak English, and they also lived in the public assistance apartment complex. An ambulance soon came to pick him up. Zia was hooked to an IV and told that what he had experienced was a result of undiagnosed diabetes. Zia told me that he didn't believe it at the time, although his wife was diagnosed long before he was. It finally took, he finally accepted the diagnosis after continuous practices of monitoring his blood sugar levels. The numbers in the everyday practice of diabetes management became representative of the disease and slowly eased his own personal doubts. After learning that he was about how he was diagnosed, I asked Zia what he thought the cure for type 2 diabetes would be. Zia answered me under the watchful gaze of his wife. If I am able to really say it, then the only way of the body would be to the heavens, and that road must only lead back to Laos. The road, was not supposed to be here. If I was in California, perhaps I would have driven off already, but the road to the heavens ended up here. And his wife's annoyed, so she's like, you want to go to the heavens, and you just go. Like General Ving Pao said, if they, Americans, were going to say we Hmong are to come to this country, then we'd never return, and that we'd never return back to Laos. Living in this country, you can't return back to Laos, so you must wait for the day whenever you can return. And so when that time comes, you just bye-bye, right? So Zia here is invoking his future death, cautious as not to speak of death, but only in metaphors, because death is risky, and even the articulation of death can bring upon death itself. And so I use the term becoming the dead for my interlocutors as them summoning up their future death. In anthropological work, and particularly in Southeast Asian contexts, ghosts are often one iteration of the dead. Engaging the dead, from ancestor spirits to ghosts and spectral traces, isn't so much of exorcising them from the living, but rather to maintain an open-ended relationship between the living and the dead. The dead and ghosts bear witness and testify in a manner that exceeds the rationality of modern politics. The dead and their haunting not only unhinges the present moment, but they also summon up their needs, their discomforts, their authority, and their power. The dead also lend power in the survival of immigrants in Langford's book, Consoling Ghosts too. So therefore, I developed the concept of becoming the dead to articulate the ways in which metaphors and idioms of death itself, offer up social and political critique about political life, right? As life, as the products of U.S. imperialism and living life in the empire. And it is an insistent reminder that Hmong sovereignty lies not in the nation state, but is eternal in the relationality of the living and the dead. Sorry, I missed this slide. Let's see, okay. So during the COVID pandemic, I started to see Hmong artists' recreation of Hmong funeral banners. This is one by Travis Bang, and as you can see, this is actually the person's blee or spirit, and the deceased he's looking at you, right, the living, and you two are guiding him home, right, and so home is this path to this kingdom. And as a successful funeral guides, the deceased blee enters the realm of the spirits and the ancestors. This relationality illustrates the way the realm of the spirit and ancestors are not closed-off worlds, but instead, in death, the plea journeys back to the ancestral lands, and on the way, return to every place that the deceased once lived, and thank the spirits in the land for their time. So returning to this unseen world may seem like a return to the past when it is said to arrive at the place of the ancestors, right? But the plea continues living as it does in Laos, cultivating the land, raising livestock. But actually the unseen world in which spirits and ancestors reside coincides with the living, so it's not past, right? It is actually within present time. In Southeast Asian religions and in Hmong animism and shamanism, the dead are very much a part of the community of the living, equating a true return to Laos, as Jia said, as a return to the heaven, Mushonlu. Jia points us to the continuous existence of the Hmong kingdom, to which one could only return to in death. Hmong funeral practices are a repetition, not in the Deleuzian sense of repetition, but rather in Iliad's definition of repetition as the same mythical instant of the beginning. Hmong funeral practices are the reenactment of the mythic, the cosmos, and society. The mythical kingdom coincides with the ritual repetition of the funeral. In its enactment, where the deceased is to be reinserted into mythical time and returned to Hmong kingdom, the self also ceases to be him or herself. This final return is a return to an eternal community, the Hmong kingdom, where family and kin exists at the same time. The final return remembers the historical route and displacement of Hmong within the world of the living. Abandoning the idea that care and the desire for repatriation for the continued displacement that Hmong people face, Jia's claim to death is a political claim to an eternal Hmong body politic. For my diabetic interlocutors, death lets go of social death within the lands of the gold, right, which is the US, in order to claim sovereignty for themselves. Conceptualizing homeland through interconnectedness beyond nation states boundaries allows us to see Hmong homeland and kingdom as infused with the historian Mai Lee writes, quote, the notion of family and clan, and cultural, that is also cultural and psychological, end quote. The Hmong homeland is then eternal and boundless while rooted within family and clan. Becoming the dead reminds us that we have never lost the Hmong kingdom, for it is eternal and within us and the dead. Oops. But one does not need to die to remember their sovereign power that resides not only in their ability to remember one another. For this last point, I draw on my claim that Hmong feminist ways of knowing articulate a politics of living, of which that is life lived and witnessed by one another. This is a radical claim for refugees who may not always witness the death of their loved ones. So towards the end of my time coordinating, towards the end of my time coordinating these diabetes group visits, there was this Hmong man, Lor. He came up to me to ask if I would develop a diabetes group visit on the topic of which is how to have a place to put your liver. But in American sense, we think of it as hope. At the time of Laura's request, we had already covered the basics of diabetes education, which includes nutrition, exercise, mental health, and medication. Unfortunately, at that time, I was leaving for the field. The field work was Laos and Thailand, and I could not provide Laura the diabetes group visit that he had requested. And for a long time, I thought that, for a long time, his request and my departure to the field had left me feeling as though I and the diabetes group visit had failed him. Furthermore, when I shared my observation with the Hmong doctor, the one who was talking about the lake, that Hmong patients seemed to enjoy these social aspects of the diabetes group visit, he had assured me that if it had become a social place for patients, then it would cease being a true diabetes group visit. In other words, it would lose its biopolitical power of fostering biological life. For my interlocutors, who are the direct product of U.S. empire building, it is not enough to place hope in expert knowledge, in institutions and in the nation state who often find their bodies useful or collateral for their own ideological life. Hmong refugees do not see themselves within that biopolitical future because they are not part of that future. It is a continual reenactment with the past, returning to the conditions that perpetuate and exacerbate chronic disease in order to inform and care for the present and to create communities on the run. So taking on Laura's question of Chögyeshia, how to have hope, I answer it with this Hmong feminist practice of care that sustains and breathes lives through a cultivation of Chögyeshia, a place to put your liver. And that points us towards this Hmong ontology of life. So this Chögyeshia does not reside in biomedical expert knowledge, nor in the technologies that curtail morbidity of chronic disease. Instead, Chögyeshia co-constructs in relationship to one another. So here, this is a group visit, and one of the ladies said, if everyone gets to know one another and care for one another and grow friendship, it will help our brains feel better. And then another person says, it is up to everyone. If everyone agrees, then you could write your name and phone number. Doctors are not allowed to share your contact information, but you can do it yourself. And then someone else goes, workers at work make co-workers. We are we are friends addicted to medicine, sick on chronic disease medications, right? And so do that so that you'll feel less stress, so that you'll have someone to help you. So Maya and others built a friend group that violated HIPAA rules. No sharing of personal information, names, or medical history, but also a friend group that violated the delineation of Hmong people and how they would relate to each other. By asking to be friends, they assist in their own radical acts of living. These Hmong women in these focus groups illustrate that the ways of becoming friends outside patriarchy, capitalism, and medical expertise is a way to continue to live through constructing a friend group that then is a place in which they can set their liver, right? So when Hmong people say the liver, that's our equation of the whole, of the heart in an American sense, right? So Hmong people have always had a really deep and ancestral knowledge of the power of affects and how emotions, right, the feel of the room, the lingering impacts of trauma, and the ways landscapes can sum up of affect in itself to be therapeutic, right? So that's my work in these returns to Laos, right? So going back to Laos is very therapeutic, and embodying the landscape, right, can be healing. So although they experience Genyushia every day, my interlocutors also recognize the caring potential of circulating their Genyushia with one another. Affect, like love, is relational, and it can also sustain people, allowing them to live longer. In Hmong culture, when a loved one is ill, it is important to visit them and bring food and sit with them. It is to jamo, right? To bring the sick back to the living. Conversations from the latest Hmong YouTube videos to the clatter of silverware and Tupperware, the smell of rice and Hmong food, are the affects of relationality that together effectively help to chopa, which is help to exhale for the sick. And to load one's barrel, right, because everything is a thing that would kill you, is one of the is a phrase one of my interlocutors use, is also to effectively care. It is to chop out together so that they can live longer, even though that they know there is no cure for diabetes. And so here Maya says, all in all, I really encourage all people with diabetes out there to join a support group and to value each other's diabetic story. We all can learn and support each other and live longer. I want to tell everyone that my experience was very sad, and because I was so sad, I'm no longer sad. And now I just laugh. I really enjoy getting involved in groups and seeing everyone like me and how they've been coping with diabetes and whether they're happy or sad and what their personalities are like, right? So in the diabetes group visit, telling personal stories about the moments of their vulnerability, like Maya's "I used to be so sad, but I'm not anymore," circulates this Hmong affect of japa, which is to exhale. It is a life-sustaining affect. At the times, the affect is melancholic, resurfacing memories that ignite some emotional and visceral pull, or a disempowering silence that calls others to bear witness to it. Right, so I think about the time Laura introduced himself, and he had suffered a stroke, and he said, I can't lift this hand above my head to wash my own head when I take a shower, right? And he talked about how I watch my numbers rise and I wait to see if someone's going to call me, or if I'm just going to die, right? And so that is the kind of the kinds of ways in which those moments bring people together, and all the people came to him and gave him Kleenex and they listened to him. And so other times the affect is contagious in a sense that it reinvigorates others compelling other women to return to the diabetes group visit. So Maya, and kind of talking about this work, there was another woman who came back to the diabetes group visit, completely made up, like with makeup and everything, and excited to return to the next group visit. This act of sharing and circulating stories of the trivial and the mundane and the personal and the gendered experiences of loss are all effectively japa excelling together. This practice is a political form of care that combats the everyday by bearing witness to their life and living, which articulates their larger refugee experience and displacement and the chronic structural vulnerabilities of post-refugee life. To japa effectively cares by contagiously reinvigorating older Hmong adults with type 2 diabetes who continue to combat the everyday to live when they are rather expected to be exposed to slow death. So no saw, no Hmong, right? So I think I'm missing a slide. So when I was doing this work, a lot of my interlocutors, they would also joke, like if you didn't see me and I stopped coming to diabetes group visits, you would know that I'm at Jackson, which is Jackson Cemetery, right? And so the point of this diabetes group visit is that we no saw, no Hmong, which means to listen to one's life and living. On a practical note, Hmong people say, "Guchinhala Hmong," which is to say, I have not heard word from them, or I have not been in touch with them lately. Such as getting a phone call from someone or knowing that they're still alive and well. But on a deeper level, to listen to one's saw and Hmong, right? Saw is the word for string, Hmong is the word for time. These are all terminologies that are linked to Hmong terminologies of life. Like for Hmong people, life is a string. It is classified as zao, to have the qualities of a string, but also to infer the ways in which that it is long, but also the ways in which it is fragile. It is this act of listening and bearing witness to their living, to no saw, no Hmong, is an act of remembering, right? Asking for the diabetes group visits to be a place to remember each other and to notice when one's life is gone is a radical and empowering ability for refugees, especially for those who are displaced and on the run and often could not witness the end of life for those who they love. Oh, so here's the quote that I thought I had missed up. So yeah, so the day that if I'm at Jackson, you would all know that my yes missing, right? And so if one of us in the diabetes group visit is missing, then we would reflect and think about how one of us left, and we would all be so sad. So we should keep in touch and reach out to no saw, no Hmong, right? And so it is important the living must also remember those that are living, right? And to bear witness to the moment in which life is extinguished, right? And so that, I think, is a very radical claim for the refugee, for which that is oftentimes taken, right? So to conclude, right, the chronic refugee articulates Hmong epistemologies and ontologies, right, that legitimately critique empire, and that these epistemologies and ontologies of the chronic refugee envision solutions for Hmong people, but they also set forth the politics of life and living. Thank you.